Public Safety Committee meeting Tuesday, June 25th, 2024 to order. Ms. Hammond, please call the roll.
Absolutely. Good afternoon. Mr. Brown?
Here.
Ms. Herbert? Here. Mr. Brennan?
Present.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hammond. I want to acknowledge via Zoom, Councilman Bailey will be participating in the dialogue, conversation, and information gathering today. So I wanted to make that point. Welcome, Mr. Bailey.
Thank you.
All right.
Good to be
moving on.
here.
Thank you, thank you. Moving on, approval of minutes. Is there a motion of approval of May 21st, 2024 Public Safety Committee meeting minutes?
So moved. Second.
There you go. Jinx. You're it. All right, all those in favor, aye?
Aye.
All those opposed? No, the ayes have it.
Thank you.
So we'll move into committee discussion. Ms. Wilson, did you want to introduce this item number 2?
Sure, Mr. Chair. For committee discussion, item number 2 is the review of options to expand the current curfew for minors. Mr. William Skip Holbrook, Police Chief, will begin the discussion.
Good afternoon, Ms. Wilson, Chairman Brennan, Mr. Brown, Ms. Herbert, and Councilman Bailey. So the purpose of today really is to start a conversation. We're currently working with our city legal department to explore the possibility of enacting and enforcing a curfew. Our intention in the near future would be to present some solid recommendations for your all's consideration regarding the potential enactment of an updated ordinance. Our legal team is also preparing a request for the seeking an Attorney General's opinion regarding our current curfews that I'll discuss in just a second to ensure that they are in compliance with state and federal law. So curfews are not something new to our city. In fact, there are 2 currently on our books. Ordinance 2011-059 is often referred to as the 5 points curfew. It was enacted in 2011, and generally speaking, it prohibits individuals 17 and under from being in 5 points each day of the week between 11 p.m. and 6 a.m. And there are a number of exceptions, just to name a few. If you're accompanied by a parent or responsible adult, there's an emergency, you happen to be near your home, you're attending church or school, you have a note from your parent, and if you're exercising First Amendment rights or you're traveling by vehicle.
Excuse me, Chief. Are you referring to 2011-0059?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am. Our second ordinance that still is in place is often referred to as the youth loitering curfew. It was enacted, and we had to research this, it was enacted in 1969, which I think should say something. This ordinance prohibits youth 14 and under from loitering, strolling, selling merchandise, or playing in a public park, street, alley, or playground unless you're accompanied by a parent, guardian, or responsible adult. That's 7 days a week, 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. The only other curfews historically we've had, of course, were during the state of emergency when we were under a COVID state of an emergency, and then for a very defined period of time during the 2020 civil unrest that we experienced. Those had a start and finish date and are no longer in effect. We have also had some limited success working with our Triple P partners in creating a curfew for individuals that were under probation for a certain category of violent offenses between certain days of the week and 5 points. That's no longer in effect either. So some unintended consequences that I would throw out for consideration is are quite simple, really. Income disparity. Oftentimes, because certain circumstances may affect somebody's where they live or how secure their home is, whether they have a car or not for transportation. Sometimes the limits that are in place will create more potential contacts with law enforcement. There's procedural issues, increases with the number of cases for family court, These offenses that we talk about related to curfew do not qualify for confinement. And of course, just a general criminalization of failure to provide a name or a minor curfew violation. And the last one, which is probably the most important that I think we must discuss and consider, would be a critical incident as a result of enforcing a curfew. And what I specifically mean by that would be a use of force related to having to seize control of somebody because of noncompliance with a curfew violation. I would also add, and I think it's important, we have not enforced either of the two current curfews that are on our books since I've been the police chief, and since 2014. And we haven't. The one was specific to 5 points. We have not had an issue with juveniles and 5 points. We know we have an issue with underage consumption and that leading to creating maybe a vulnerable population, but that has not been a juvenile issue for us. And of course, we literally had to research to find the other curfew that's on the books, which was the loitering, and it dates back to 1969. Interestingly, today, this morning, I had an opportunity to participate in a Socratic review of a book with an upward bound class at the University of South Carolina. It was rising junior and seniors at our Richland 1 high schools, and it really, it couldn't have been better timing for me. It was just an incredible conversation with young adults, and it just reminded me just how much pressure our children are under to be young adults. We were reviewing, we had a book assignment. We were reading a book about someone had been killed, and the discussion was about revenge. And it was just really interesting to listen to these young adults, and it encouraged me because, and it reinforced to me, is that we cannot let the few define the many. And what I mean by that is, and they pointed out, you know, these are students that they were selected, but they also expressed an interest in this program. And I would define them as the majority of our young adults. You know, just like we have these conversations about our prolific adult offenders, there is a small percent, whether it's an adult offender or a juvenile offender, that really is probably framing our discussion. And I think we just need to always keep that in mind. There is another municipality, as I talked to some of my peers, of notoriety that is worth just mentioning. Myrtle Beach does have a curfew. That's obviously an incredibly popular tourist destination, and it's also a popular destination for kids, you know, at graduation and other, you know, sentinel moments in their life. But it is somewhat subjective in my discussion with leadership there, and certainly there is a lot of discretion that's applied, and they primarily use it to disperse large crowds. Oftentimes there's parents or adults of responsibility there, and that is between 12 p.m. and 6 a.m. And if someone does not comply, then they are taken into custody and transported to the police headquarters, and a parent, legal guardian, or somebody responsible is called to come get them. A few other factors that I think you need to know to consider. You know, oftentimes the narrative is different than the facts, and that's somewhat of the case in this discussion, but not completely. But let me just share this with you. Part 1 crimes involving juveniles are trending down significantly since 2020, both violent crime and property crime. So, and let me share that with you. Violent crimes in 2020 were at 80. This is involving juveniles. In 2021, 60. In 2022, 72, 2023, 88, and so far this year, 28. If that continues to track, it'll be a historic year for a low number of violent offenses involving juveniles. Our total crimes have tracked total Part 1 crimes, this is violent and property crimes, 239 in 2020, 158 in 2021, 193 in 22, 197 in 23, and 71 year-to-date, halfway through a year in 24. Again, tracking at a historic level. Of the 14 zip codes in Columbia, 29203 sees a significantly higher number of juvenile crimes compared to the other zip codes. For example, since 2020, 29203 has had 258 reported juvenile crimes compared to the next highest zip code at 91. So it's very geographic specific. Year-to-date, our shooting hits stand at 28. This is a 50% reduction from this time last year. And I'll say again, a 50% reduction. We've had 23 non-fatal shootings, and that's a 55% reduction from last year, and 5 fatal shootings, and that is the same as last year. So far in 2024, there's been an increase in juvenile shootings. So we've seen a reduction in shootings, but we have seen an increase in juvenile shootings and shootings of victims under the age of 18. Typically, juvenile victims account for 10 to 15% of our shootings. This year, it's hovering around 27%. But 19% of those occur between 9 p.m. and 6 a.m. So again, it's a small number, but it is an increase, and it is specific to a time period and specific geographically. But the number is small. So I really would like to throw it back to you all to, you certainly can ask me any questions or how you would like to proceed with the discussion. We have we have statistics to show our patterns and trends. We certainly know we have some critical incidents that I think have led to this discussion, and in that, no statistic, good or bad, takes the place of that critical incident and how that's affected a family, friends, and a community like we've seen here. There are, I think there are some significant advantages to potentially having, an ordinance like this on the books, but I think there's probably conversely equal disadvantages. So really, I think it does require significant discussion and thought to make sure that we are, doing what I know everybody's goal is, to do things that are constitutionally correct, fair, and enforceable.
Great. Thank you, Chief. Before I open it up to questions, I do want to have a follow-up conversation about city strategies that maybe are attributing to these reductions that we're seeing statistically in youth crime. But right now, I want to open it up to any questions from the committee. Mr. Bailey as well.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Mr. Bailey, you're recognized.
Chief, thank you for discussing and bringing this information to the council. A couple of questions I have regarding the trend down, which is good. We all like to hear less violent crime. Is the demographic trend still overwhelmingly African American and male? If we're looking at all the crime being down, or some per se, would the victims of the violent crime still in that geographic location be somewhere, 70 to 80% one race versus the other?
Yes, sir, it does. Our victimization is very similar to our identified suspects. It's around 90%, and it is primarily young African-American men.
Thank you, Chief. And another question I have is regarding the breakdown geographically, where the youth violent crime appears to be ongoing or occurring, would you say, or in your opinion, do you believe there could be some benefit to a geographic curfew of a certain area, or do you think that may not be called for at the further exploration of limiting the scope of the area where a curfew could be?
So I think statistically, we can say with certainty that the crime is disproportionately occurring in some specific areas. Therefore, I don't know that a blanketed curfew would be necessary or even a good idea. But I would think for the same argument, I can't say that there would not be unintended consequences, even in an area that is, experiencing a disparately higher volume of violent crime. And, we know that 29203 has historically been a challenged area for violent crime, among other things, but it also is an area that we invest heavily in resources and in programming. It's an area we care very much about. It has tremendous history to our community, to our city. Many of our staff live in 29203. We all, have friends in 29203, and there's a variety of factors that drives this. But as we have spoken, Councilman Bailey, my greatest concern as a police chief is a critical incident involving a young adult, because we're attempting to do the right thing for the right reasons, but it puts us in a position to fail potentially as a department and as a city with in the spirit of trying to do the right thing.
Understandable, Chief, and I appreciate you sharing that as well. And two brief last follow-up questions I have. And just looking at the year that you said of the curfew, that was 1969. My assumption is that council probably passed that after the assassination of MLK, then Robert Kennedy Jr. the year following, which was in 1969. And then it looks like we passed one during the social unrest in 2020. Just reflecting on 2020, did the department have to enforce that curfew at all? Or was there kind of general compliance?
What it allowed us to do is, one, it gave us the authority to be in a place to engage the public and to direct them according to the ordinance. I don't have any of the numbers in front of me from those 2 days regarding curfew violations, but it was minimal. What I would say, it was a tremendous tool at the time, because sometimes you think that you just make an announcement like that and everybody knows. That we found that not to be the case. There were some folks that we would inform that they were in violation of curfew, and they would immediately comply with dispersing. And that really is, if we do decide to construct some type of ordinance like that, I think it needs to be done in a way that gives us a tool to be lawfully in the place we need to be to enforce. And what I'm specifically talking about would be when a situation like we're called to private property, maybe a large crowd, and then have some authority to enforce that if we have non-compliance. But I would hope, if we do consider this, that we would have a significant educational, process and what's the philosophy behind the ordinance to help us with compliance when we're able to, if we have a situation where we have to disperse a large group.
Thank you for that, Chief. I'm sorry, Mr. Bailey, you have one more question?
I'm sorry, Councilman Brennan. Yes, one last question, I promise. As of right now, Chief, are there any tools that the department has to disperse large crowds, such as the situation in Meadow Lake with a flash mob of students who get on social media? They say, hey, let's all link up at Lower Park, for example, at 2 a.m. Do we have any tools in our arsenal that right now allows officers to just disperse a crowd of minors, per se, in that situation?
We do it with, in certain respects, especially when it comes to crowds that would impede traffic, vehicular or pedestrian traffic, or create a sense of general, safety issues on public property. A call for service on private property would, create some, impediments at times, but what we have done a pretty good job at, and I think we've learned over the years dealing with last minute, protests or situations where people are exercising their First Amendment rights, is when we do monitor social media, and when we learn of incidents that are either are going to occur, we're able to reach out to leadership oftentimes to put them on notice about what we have experienced in the past with certain events, or we've been able to staff accordingly. So if we know an event could potentially be problematic, then we would staff accordingly and put resources where they need to be a deterrent. Typically, if we know about it and we're present, it most of the time does not result in any problem. But it is a drain on resources when that happens.
Thank you. Councilwoman Herbert.
Thank you, Chief. I have just a couple of questions, and this may be one that you all will have to come back to us on, but when this was enacted, do we have anything that shows how effective it was or not? Because we have a lot of ordinances on the books. What I would like to know, if that data is somewhere, did we ever use it? I know we haven't used it since you've been here, but did we ever use it? And did they see any type of difference in behavior? And I don't know if you have that information.
I don't have that in front of me, Ms. Herbert, but I will tell you, since we were directed to look into this and have this conversation, I have asked some of our veterans that were around at that time, do you remember that ordinance, and was there ever any enforcement? And I've not run across anybody that has said, yes, I remember when we enforced it on, during this situation or that situation. I have not had that happen. So we'll do a deeper dive and see if there's any data that would support that. But my feeling is probably not.
Okay. And again, I'm just curious because when we're considering things, I like to make sure whatever we're considering is going to be effective. If it's not effective, we don't need to spend too much time on it. Now, I used to be a public defender, Richland County, only represented the juveniles. So this is a discussion. Yeah, you know that, right? It was the best time in my life being a public defender. And of course, y'all know that I'm from 29203. So I have the unique experience of representing neighbors, friends. We used to pick up kids from, it's Ashley Apartments. Our church used to pick them up. And so I see this from all sides. And so I'm concerned about it, but I want to hear more about it to see, again, if it will even make a difference. Because if I heard you correctly, you said that with the curfew, it doesn't qualify for a confinement for the juveniles?
Yes, ma'am.
So if they violate it, then what do you do with the young kids?
That's a great question. What I would foresee us having to do would be to temporarily take them into custody, transport them either to their residence or to headquarters and await a parent or legal guardian or an adult of responsibility to come get them. So that would be something we would have to flesh out. And then, worst case scenario, it's someone that we repeatedly deal with. Then the question becomes, then what? Are we, do we hold an adult responsible? Or, where does that go? So That's a fair question, but I don't really have a clear path for that.
And then you have to remind me, what do we consider juveniles? Is it 17 and under or 16 and under?
Yes, 17.
17 and under. So that we would have that would be a problem for anyone under that age.
Yes, ma'am.
That's all I have for right now.
Thank you, Ms. Herbert. Mr. Brown?
Yeah, thanks, Chief. Appreciate you being here as always. Are there any circumstances that either current curfew would be enforced by the police department?
Any circumstances that it would be enforced? Well, if there was I mean, it really would depend on the circumstance. And
I mean, is there any chance that the 5 points curfew would be enforced tonight? Under any circumstances?
I really don't know that there would be.
Okay, I was just curious. My second question to that was, are these things that we should then address of why we still have them active?
I think that's part of this discussion is why they are still on the books if we're not enforcing them. And is there a need to update them to where they are more applicable to the problem that we're dealing with now?
Can you speak to typical protocol for enforcement of a curfew?
Well, I think the first tier would be to identify someone that's in violation and disperse them.
What if they don't go?
Then that would be the next stage would be to, again, identify them and secure them, temporarily take them into custody. And then as a result of that, we would remove them from that situation and take them either to their home or, a responsible adult, or we would have to take them to headquarters or another facility and stand by till we, found somebody of responsibility that could come get them.
And I think that is where the potential unintended consequences occur.
Certainly.
And it was under I could have made this up because I've talked a lot about this and have tried to really spend some quality time trying to take what I think are maybe my predisposed concepts of a curfew and say that, my original thinking is that, every parent has the right to enforce a curfew. So that's my original. So I have spent some time on this. It's my understanding that we're potentially enforced that the first concept of the engagement was a verbal warning.
Yes.
Okay, so that's what worries me is that it's the enforcement of it, but it's also, what does that enforcement look like? Is that enforcement reasonable? Does that enforcement work? And then we get to the point where now we've entered into a whole different category where the enforcement seems to be too much. So that's what I worry about is whether or not by having something that's generally unenforceable from a practical standpoint, that we're actually potentially doing more harm than good.
I believe that's a very certain consideration.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Chief, just a couple questions before we move along. Citywide, we have park hours, sun up to sundown. Private property, we work with private property owners for trespassing issues after hours. Is there any way to strengthen those connections, those enforcements, as far as the disbursement? You said you monitor Facebook, use social media. Your team is ahead of the game a lot of the time. And we see it. We've seen some examples with the Parks and Recs with large parties that have been dispersed. Are we enforcing that pretty regularly, the Parks and Rec? And do you think there's an engagement to have with large commercial property owners to strengthen that tie?
You know, I never want to, sound like we're just, we achieve complete success and there's nothing else we need. But I would, whether it's how we work with our business owners to work through the whole trespassing, putting somebody on trespass and that due process that is necessary to where we, create rights for us to enforce that on their private property. That works well. Our dusk to dawn, ordinance for parks works well. And what I mean by that is it's widely known. And occasionally, and it's occasionally, but occasionally we do, have a pop-up party or something that may occur, and we respond and we disperse. And typically, if somebody's not dispersing, it's not just they're not dispersing, they're, engaging in some other type of conduct that is criminal in nature, and we would just, we would effect an arrest for that. But the fact that, we're able to show up and give a lawful order for them to disperse and have compliance, I think that's, means that works well too. The question is, I guess, on how do we deal with that in a broader sense? I don't have a
Gotcha.
complete answer for you.
Understand. And then the Myrtle Beach, you mentioned discretion. They use it to clear crowds, to disperse. Is that the main reason that is in place for that specific angle?
I don't want to speak for them with that level of certainty. That's the impression that I got in my discussions is, it's a citywide curfew, but I think its primary purpose is to disperse large crowds. Now, that could be large crowds in a beachfront parking lot, or it could be a large crowd in a neighborhood. They would apply it the same way.
But it boils down to the discretion of the officers on duty, on patrol.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Ms. Herbert.
Just one follow-up question regarding the confinement. If it doesn't qualify for confinement, does that mean they have to could they ever get to DJJ or to, because they can't go to Bluff Road now, but does it mean we always would have to go to headquarters and hold them, or does it mean maybe go to DJJ and hold them, but they can't go to the back?
Yeah, I don't know if we even have an answer for
Am I
that.
overthinking
We're
it?
still,
But, logistically.
yeah, it's pretty fluid right now for just how we're navigating status offenses, with juveniles, with, how we're proceeding with the closing of Alvin S. Glenn.
Mr. Chair, may I? And these discussions a lot, and I think there's two different things going on here. The concept of a blanket curfew, as Chief described in his comments at the beginning, overarching crime numbers going down, et cetera, meeting with a group of young people today who are well-intentioned and doing the right things, and many of our young people are. But then we have the bad apples in the bunch. And so if we're just cut into the chase about what we're really talking about here, if in fact there were a curfew, and I think the point that the councilwoman may be making is, so if it's just young people being young people and being out too late, that's one thing. But if it's young people who have a history of crime, truancy, not being where they're supposed to be, doing things they're not supposed to do over and over and over again, and if their parents are allowing that, or guardians, whatever the situation might be, are the right tools with the right teeth in the toolbox? And I think we all know the answer is no. And so how do we distinguish as we go down this path and look for the right solutions, whatever that might look like, where if in fact a curfew were in place that addresses those individuals who shouldn't probably be out anyway for other reasons, but that's above what local government can probably do with state laws, et cetera. Is there any precedence in any of the research that you all have done so far with your peer cities that have the curfews where the individuals that we're talking about are tracked and their parent or guardian, if they're a youthful offender, are held responsible in any way?
I don't know that with certainty, Ms. Wilson. That's a very good question, and I see exactly where you're going with that. You know, I think part of our problem, if you will, with this whole discussion is, once again, it comes back to the police dealing with a very broad societal issue. And again, to your point with that few handful of people that are the bad actors, that's where our focus needs to be. But if everybody, we're just one spoke in the wheel. If everybody in their respective areas of responsibility are, following through on their mission, whether it's dealing with mental health services, or if somebody is on probation, actually monitoring them and tracking where they are and holding them accountable. And if somebody is a repeat offender, that at some point, I'm all in for second chances, but at some point, somebody's got to be held accountable. So, I mean, we all have a shared responsibility in this, and to me, if everybody will just do what they're supposed to do in their areas of responsibility, especially with the ones that are identified as the bad actors, then we wouldn't be having this conversation. Yes, it's never a good idea for our young people to be out after midnight, as the saying goes, but if they are, and they're like that group of kids that I spoke to today, and you're monitoring the bad actors, then you don't have to worry about the bad actor pulling a gun and shooting it into a crowd and hitting one of the kids that has nothing to do with being a bad actor. That's the issue. And I think we're reacting to a situation like that because our hearts break when stuff like that happens. And but we've all got to pull in the same direction. It cannot fall back on the city and the city police department every time we have some breakdown in societal ills, and that's frustrating. I know what these officers do every single day, and I know what we're up against, and I also know where their heart lies and how important safety and just how important our young people are to them. I mean, because they're all moms and dads, and this is a serious issue. But I'm telling you that it is a small group of offenders, both adults and juveniles. It is a small group. And that's why we're seeing success, is because our strategy is focused on that. But, we're making progress in this 16-year-old's murder. But don't be surprised if people responsible for it aren't bad actors. That this isn't the first time this has happened.
Thank you, Chief. Councilwoman Herbert, and then Mr. Bailey will come to you, sir.
One of the things I just thought about is how we used to handle truancy. And so when kids aren't going to school, the question becomes, well, is it the child's individual decision, or should mama or daddy be held responsible? The difference, I think, with truancy, though, is they're missing school, the schools have a relationship. You know, they've been able to watch this family for a while. Because I would think that at some point that same type of discretion might need to be determined whether or not, how you handle a 9-year-old versus a 14-year-old. And it could be either way, not saying that the 9-year-old is the innocent one. But that, in thinking about that, that is also another thought that I don't know if you all will have the time to make that kind of assessment on the spot too.
Yeah, I don't know, Ms. Herbert. I'm getting fired up just listening to all this. Shortly after I got here, we did a couple of things. We implemented a Handle with Care program, and every time a young person is a witness or subjected to some type of negative encounter with law enforcement, or we come to a house and they see that potential trauma, we report that to the school so they can wrap their arms around that child that next day in case there's a behavioral problem. So it's not treated as discipline, it's treated as behavioral. The other thing that we did, and we didn't have the capacity to do this, but I felt like it was important, is we would do a check-in. So we would get a list of people from DJJ of people that were on paper for juvenile offenses that had requirements to be at home at a certain time. And we would go do house checks because we knew that was us being a partner. We don't have anybody that's quote on that confinement anymore for us to check on. Every week we have a staff meeting and they report out number of Handle with Care submitted, number of juvenile checks. 0, 0, 0 on the juvenile checks. How is that possible?
Mr. Bailey.
And thank you, Mr. Chairman and Chief. I think our department, y'all doing a great job, and our violence prevention efforts and reduction efforts are great. I do think that as policymakers council, we should always be looking at ways to further protect people in the community. And so I think the policymaking body council that we're exploring this, our primary objective should be to protect, not to punish, protecting kids. So is anybody from legal there today? I'm sorry, I can only see Chief PK there or Jasmine.
I'm more than happy to pass the shoe. Yes, we have legal here. Do you have a question?
Well,
do you have a question for legal?
Yeah. One thing I would ask while we're exploring, while we're reaching out to the Attorney General's office for advisory opinion, that we do some sort of, maybe it doesn't have to be a 50-state survey, but at least a deeper survey of other municipalities and what their ordinances have in there for enforcement and punishment, but also to look at policy that departments have regarding how it's enforced. That way, if we're looking and further exploring what the ramifications will be of the ordinance, that we can craft it accordingly, so we don't have to guess about whether a kid is going to be detained or whether a kid will actually get ticketed. I think there's ways we can craft any ordinance out of this that primarily objective is to disperse, get kids home and protect them, not punishing kids, for staying out too late. But I appreciate everything that you've done, and I was hoping that legal, if we can get some more information on other policies surrounding these ordinances across the country, I think that can give us some guidance.
Yes, sir. We'll report back with that.
Thank you. Ms. Wilson, could you ask staff to take a look at the 2 ordinances that are on the books now and the process to possibly, if we want to take those back, if that goes to admin or public safety, if decided?
Yes, I think it can stay right here and we can go ahead and do that.
We are making great strides, City of Columbia, undertaking engagement and education strategies in our communities and with our youth. I guess, if you'd like some time, Dr. Fordham, to come up here and talk about some of the strategies that you're undertaking and the successes and the challenges that you're seeing. I hope I'm not catching you off guard with this, but we appreciate the new office that you have formed and how you are making great strides in grassroots communications in our community. So I'll turn it over to you, sir.
Well, thank you, Chairman Brennan, Councilman Brown, Councilman Herbert, Ms. Wilson, and everyone. Wanted to take a moment just to talk about some community engagement and education strategies from the vantage point of the Office of Violent Crime Prevention. Before I even get started, I just would like to point out and emphasize the fact that we're all here today and we're all focused and really talking about ways to make the city of Columbia better and safer. I believe that's the goal for everybody that's here sitting in this room today, to make this city better and safer. Regardless of where you sit, regardless of where you are or what position you have, it's to make this city better and safer for all of our residents. Another thing to really point out and to keep in the back of everybody's minds is that right now, the city of Columbia is the only municipality with an established Office of Violent Crime Prevention. No one else in the state of South Carolina has that. I was down in the city of North Charleston last week. They had a gun violence forum, 3-day sessions. And as I was meeting with some of their folks and talking to some of their community folks and some folks from the police department, I will say this, the coordination that we have so far and with us all coming together is second to none in this state. So I think people really need to take that opportunity to really acknowledge that in the city of Columbia and the work that's continuing to go on. So we're going to skip through a lot of this, but I wanted to share some engagement and some educational strategies that we're talking about, because ultimately as we talk about whether it's curfews or we talk about youth crime, we talk about those numbers, a lot of it comes down to engagement with the community, but also education. Is there a clicker? Okay. All right, so I'm gonna skip through the overview, background, but I wanna look at some objectives that we're talking about. As we're really talking about addressing violence among youth, promoting community engagement and involvement, educating residents on violence prevention and reduction strategies, informing residents on the city's violence reduction efforts, and the key to all of this, maintain safe and healthy communities. That's important. Talk about focus areas, of course, and I won't go through all of these, but the key to that is community engagement and involvement. That's going to be the key as we talk about sharing information and education. There's a research piece to this, but trainings as well too. But as Chief pointed out, and as we talk about the assessment of the city, I brought 3 documents with me today. One is an actual joint research document from Benedict College and the University of South Carolina that looked at youth violence from 2008. And I can tell you, as we look at it, we can just strike out 2008 and put 2024 on it, all right? But they do offer some solutions, and in those solutions, they talk about resources, they talk about programming, but they also talk about the need to focus on those who are at greatest risk. That small percentage, as we talk about those individuals who we know are bad actors and committing majority of our crimes, those small concentrated pockets within the city of Columbia that we have, focusing and really putting out resources and support for those areas. Some of the goals for the next, really 6 months to, well, before that, but education and highlighting awareness of community violence issues within the next 90 days. This is something that we've also been working on, and as we are going through the rebranding and purchasing more materials and marketing materials, printed materials, that will be key. Engagement. Increasing engagement and community involvement when we talk about addressing gun violence particularly, but also other forms of violence. We're talking about sexual assault, domestic violence, aggravated assaults, all of those things, but also the research piece. As we talk about the number of youth, what is that number particularly? As we talk about all of these different things, and when we're looking to address these things, having the solid data to really be efficient. So working, of course, with higher education, public health, law enforcement, and others when we talk about the research piece of it all. Execution strategies for the education piece. And these are things that we didn't come up with as an office because of today's meeting. These are things that have already been in the works, okay? And there's actually an entire proposal that's written about, but I wanted to put the presentation together. Implementing a targeted public safety awareness campaign. That will be multimedia, okay? So we're talking about not only video, social media, television, and also printed materials. Increasing our partnerships with local organizations to provide prevention and reduction of violence workshops for youth and parents. And when we talk about youth, we talk about folks who are up to that age of 24. Those youth and young adults, because that's where we're seeing from that sweet spot of about 16 to 24 in the city, but also extends out for us, upper 30s, 38, even to 41, and it's kind of varied over the last 5 years. Facilitating when we talk about firearm workshops and trainings. Talk about storage, handling, increasing those, because I know some are being done now, but making sure that we're getting to the right folks who really need to hear that message. It's one thing for us to have that conversation and that message at a library or somewhere else versus on-site in a community, at a community center, at an apartment complex. So really taking those things on-site. We've spoken before about a gun violence summit, so that's also something in the works. And also looking at conflict resolution courses. The engagement piece. Public listening sessions, not just as far as for folks to come and sit and talk, but also when we talk about those tabletop exercises and really having folks to talk about and being part of the action plan. One of the things that I'm hearing and that I've heard is that there's some meeting exhaustion from folks, where they're tired of coming around just to meet and just to meet, just to meet. But with that being said, as we're coming to meet and we're putting together the action plan, and they can see that they're part of that for the community that they live in, they then take that back to their neighbors, their family members. And that's how we spread the message of the city's violence reduction efforts on everything that the city's doing. Promoting safe spaces when we talk about programming. They're in the works now, a Beauty and a Barbershop talk series where we will be having different service providers, whether it's mental health, whether it's substance use, whether it's just talking about normal issues, to actually go in different beauty and barbershops on a Friday evening, which is that time span when we see violence, or Saturday, right? So we'll be identifying those and actually putting those dates out soon as well too. Working to have volunteer groups and neighborhood associations to really step up and do a little bit more. We've got a lot of organizations in the city that do an amazing job, they do a great job, but that increase in engagement is what's going to be key. Again, we're not talking about all of the general efforts that we do every day as a city. We're really talking about reaching down and reaching those folks who seem to be missed, but those are the ones that are bad actors, that are repeat offenders that we really are working to get to. So partnering with local service providers to launching and really looking at the why. We've got a lot of young people out here. The availability of guns is not short at all. You can get firearms and all that other stuff. But when you see young folks with weapons on them, what's the reason? We have our reasons, but really talking to them, sitting down with them, and finding out the why. One of the things that I'm sure Chief and some of the law enforcement can attest to that is when you start really breaking down and talking to them, there are other factors outside of law enforcement that really play into that, whether it's environmental, whether it's something within that home or within that community. So those are all factors when we talk about that cognitive behavioral therapy, and really focusing on the why with young people. And of course, encouraging community collaborations and interventions. And these are just some research points when we talked about that as far as updating, looking at our data analysis or reporting collection, not just when we talk about violence statistics of reported crime, but also those root causes of violence. So as we're talking about the unemployment rates that feed into that, we're talking about education, so we're talking about housing, we're talking about all of those root causes that really play into violence, as Chief said, that are outside of law enforcement. Those are the things that as we're looking to actually host job fairs, community fairs, resource fairs. Those are the things that are going to be important to know the where and the why as we really work with folks in communities. Again, all of those things are actually in motion right now. Some of them have been evident over the last 11 months through some of the programs that we've hosted, whether it was highlighting Mental Health Awareness Month and the 3K Walk, whether it's the reentry program that we had, whether it's Youth Violence Prevention Week, where last year we had one event as a city. This year we actually increased it to 4. Whether it's been having a crime remembrance vigil or a youth forum, which we're going to have again this year in October for YJAM. So all of those things really kind of work together as we talk about the coordination of all of the supportive services across the city. Get folks going in the same direction. Again, we've got a lot of community organizations that are doing great work, but some of them are clashing, some of them are over here, over there. And so serving this office, the coordination piece is what's been most important and key with that. And that's where it can help and assist in this project. Right? As we talk about parenting courses, I've already talked with at least 4 different organizations who are ready to do some parenting classes. They have grant funding, and the parenting classes vary. So all of them just aren't saying, hey, this is how you be a parent, right? One specifically deals with having conversations from parents to youth about firearm safety, about how to handle conflicts, about conflict resolution, right? Another one does more with supportive services. So all of those things are actually in the works, and again, we'll be releasing some more details on that soon. We were awarded a local solicitation through the Bureau of Justice Assistance, or BJA. So that will actually be used for a public service announcement campaign. And it specifically will look at gun violence prevention, reduction, and other efforts for the city of Columbia. So we'll be working on that as well. City partnerships with community organizations. As I talk about those organizations who do work in mental health, do counseling, vocational services, workforce development. Things are designed to really help people who are working on a second chance, or those folks to deter them from further committing violence. But again, the key to that also is just the collaborations with local organizations and nonprofits. The desired outcomes. Now, when I put this presentation together, it was more so of kind of an update of what we're doing, not specifics per se. We do have specifics on everything that's on this PowerPoint. But of course, when we talk about determining the timelines, are specific to the target population. Our target population right now is really the folks that we're kind of slipping through cracks of society, if you will. They are the folks that are repeat offenders. There are the folks that if you go and have a program, if we had a program here today at Busby, like we're doing now, they're not coming through that door. Right? We can have a program every single day of the week. We can have it outside of their door. That doesn't mean they're coming. So that's the key and the challenge for us is engaging those individuals, working with local nonprofits, working with communities to really engage different folks across the city. And of course, these are just some other desired objectives as we talk about the office.
Out there, please, sir.
Yeah.
All our wonderful community representatives here, please reach out to Dr. Fordham. You see his cell number specifically there.
The ones that
and
are in
his
the room
email
that I
address.
see, they definitely call and text me. Yeah. Call, text, call,
We cherish the
email,
relationships
talk.
you're building
Right.
in our neighborhoods. Ms. Herbert, you had a question?
Well, one statement, is the mayor still here?
He had to leave.
He is not? Oh. Well, I just wanted to commend Mayor Rickman because we had a lot of discussions about the Office of Violent Crime Prevention, and we were determined to get it done, and he really made sure that we got this office up and going, as well as your position. So I just want to make sure I'm on the record of telling Mayor Rickman how much I appreciate that. And then Dr. Fordham, I don't see the best event that you've had all year anywhere in your paperwork.
Correct.
You want me to discuss it, or you?
So that will definitely be part of the one-year review, which is coming up soon. But yes, one of the events that came up with folks, and they really asked about it, and speaking with Parks and Recreation, I'm sure there'll
It's
be
the
another one coming up
favorite- the
again
favorite
soon.
event, the
They
favorite.
said the favorite event was a game night with Councilwoman Herbert, okay, that happened at Hyatt Park. With that also being said, there are some other, again, when we talk about the youth forum that's coming up, there's some, working with Parks and Recreation, there's some other events that we're looking at to increase some things they're doing when it comes to prime time in the parks, and even integrating the arts. So writing, when it comes to poetry, just expressive writing for young people to get thoughts out, conflict resolution, to address some of those emotions, even some of the traumas that they're addressing through music. And so we want to highlight them and also have that as a segue between events in August, September, and leading up to the Youth Justice Action Month, or YJAM event in October.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Mr. Brown?
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Fordham, for being here. I really appreciate it. I think this is a good follow-up to the previous conversation about this particular strategy with the city. Where are you going? Come on back.
Escaping.
So, a couple things. So, as a father of 4 children, I was 100% convinced as we were raising them that they never listened to anything. Only to find out that they actually do listen, they just don't tell you all the time when they're listening. So I'm a big believer in, when you talk about education and the strategies of public safety awareness campaigns. I really would implore us to do 2 of them. One would be home by midnight. Is midnight where are your kids? And really just emphasize the concept of what my dad would have told me when we were growing up, which is nothing good happens after midnight, and he was right. So really just, I think that's a key message for parents, for kids, for the community. Second one is about guns. Guns are part of our society, but guns kill people. And that's just a fact. And we need to really enforce the messaging around guns. Guns aren't toys. They're not meant for 14-year-olds, and they're certainly not meant at parties and large gatherings in the community. And I think we need to really think about those 2 things. The final thing that I think is just as important is job fairs. There's a lot of us who are employers. We cannot find employees. We would love to have 16, 17, 18, 19-year-old kids that go to school to work for us in the summer. I think that's a really something we can collaborate on and kind of work together in the community. And I always look for ways to try to bring, a lot of times we don't we forget that the business community is part of the community. And a lot of times, because of that, they get a free pass. And there ain't no free passes anymore. So I think we need to really concentrate on those three areas. And I think if you make a difference in one kid's life, in my mind, you've made a difference.
Yes, sir. And Councilman Brown, that was just a conversation we had yesterday as we were meeting and talking about a summer employment program, but also one that we can have throughout the year as well, too, for young folks.
It's and these are, like, I get it. My business has a factory, but it's not the factory of 4 years ago. It might be 100 degrees outside, but it's 78 degrees in the factory. And it's good skill level, it's good pay level, it's real work, real pay, real quality of life type stuff. And I think we've kind of lost a little bit of our focus on, the concept of, well, that's not what I want to do. But, well, the answer is it's a good job and it's a lot better than no job.
Yes, sir. Right.
So I'm willing to help in any way I can on that front. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Brown. Mr. Bailey, do you have anything? All right.
No, Mr. Chair, I
There he
don't.
is.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Nothing from me, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you, Mr. Bailey. Ms. Wilson.
Just real briefly, and I guess echo Councilwoman Herbert's sentiments about the Office of Violent Crime Prevention. I wanted to publicly applaud Trevon for having the fortitude that you must have sometimes as the newbie at the city. Truly a newbie in the fact that it was an office that we've never had before. It was probably getting me out of my own comfort zone because I'm a traditionalist when it comes to being a practitioner of local governance. And what I think we're finding from a societal standpoint now is that local government is totally leaning into areas, whether it's homeless services and violent crime prevention, that we haven't traditionally had to educate ourselves on and step up. And so I wanted to say thank you for doing that because it was not an area where we could give you a whole lot of guidance all the time, and you hung in there. And I appreciate that, hung in there and gotten your doctorate in the process. So congratulations and thank you, Trevon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wilson. I echo that. Absolutely. You've done great work with growing the communities and the grassroots and the connectivity. One last question, and before we adjourn, and Chief, you can probably chime in on this, is the identifying the youth that need the extra attention for behavioral issues. And you made a great point about youth falling through the cracks. So the traditional outlets of going to school districts and really working with them. What is that relationship like currently with our school districts and the communication back and forth? Is that something we can lead on to really extend a hand to say, hey, we want to help and really bring the school districts and the city and the service providers in to really make a difference?
So from the experience so far, I know we've really leaned a good bit on Richland One. We've partnered with them on at least 3 events. They've allowed us to host events at their locations. Just spoke to a representative from there yesterday, matter of fact, as we were talking about different things. I think what you all will see is this upcoming school year, there will be more of an imprint when we talk about violence reductions in schools, through the forms of being at events that are in schools, different assemblies, and more partnerships working with that. There's a connectedness. A lot of things that happen, and Chief can attest to this from a law enforcement standpoint, a lot of things that happen in the communities usually stem from schools. And then things, and vice versa, right? So really having that connectedness where the messaging's the same, where we're all working on that. And actually, even as part of that BJA grant, it was an aspect that I added in there was to actually create a violence prevention and reduction school-based program. So we reached out to the school district prior to putting that in there, and that's part of it as far as the programming. So continuing that partnerships, because it's going to be key as far as schools. A lot of times that's where a lot of people or a lot of young people, they will find out if they need extra help, issues, there are counselors, social workers, psychologists, but also they can relay that to the community sense as well too. So it's been It's been a great relationship so far, one that we're looking to expand as we talk about the JAG program with jobs through the local schools with Richland 1 and Richland 2. So those are things we're looking to do this upcoming year, even with Lexington and Richland 5 and other schools in the district.
Did you have anything to add, Chief, towards that relationship?
No, other than I think I think there's always room for improvement. But I think what Trayvon brings to the city, and I think it's a great bridge between the police department and our schools. But I think that communication I think it's critically important, and it cuts both ways.
Absolutely. You know, the teachers in the classroom experience a lot, can feel a lot from their students. So any way we can take that sensitivity from the classroom level to the administration counseling to our partners, I think is very important. So I'd encourage you to keep pushing that. And Councilwoman Herbert has one more question.
No, this is for Chief. You said earlier that when you're dealing with things at the school, you treat it as behavioral, and there's some follow-up checks that are supposed to be done.
So the
What are
way
those called?
Yes, ma'am. The way the Handle with Care program is designed, and it is now a statewide program, but the notification comes from the police department, which is really just a pointer system. It is putting the individual school on notice that this particular student potentially experienced some trauma, or certainly was a witness to a negative incident. It involved law enforcement, and it's letting them know that it happened, and then they can put whatever services are in place around that student that day. But most importantly, we wouldn't want a situation maybe happened 12 hours before it, be perceived as a behavioral problem at school, when there may be some underlying issues there that need to be addressed, and then it become disciplinary issue, and then that just starts a cycle that just like we see with on the criminal side. And it's I think it's an evidence-based program. It's very proven, but everybody has a very important role in it for it to be successful.
Thank you. Chief, Dr. Fordham, Ms. Wilson, staff, thank you for your time today for this very important topic. With that, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
Motion.
Second?
All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned.